Hi, boys and girls. I thought I'd take a little time today to read Soldier Dogs. We're on the second chapter. So, in the beginning, we learned that Matt and his foster sister Rachel are trapped under the rubble of a gymnasium that has been bombed. The dog, Chief, knows they're there, but nobody will listen to Chief, so the firemen go away thinking no one is there. So I'm on chapter 2, 7 hours earlier. So what had happened before they had gotten trapped in the gymnasium? Clean the table, Matt's mother told him after dinner. Matt paused in the door to the hallway. It's Rachel's turn. Rachel's doing her homework, his mother said. I'm walking the dog. Matt trotted toward the side door, yelling over his shoulder. I'll do it when I get back. Don't go too far, his mother called after him. She'd been on edge for a month, ever since the Germans threatened to bomb historical sites in England. They lived in a historical site, the ancient city of Canterbury. Before Matt reached the door, Chief loped beside him from the other room. Matt wasn't surprised. Chief always showed up when you needed him. Matt's older brother, Eric, used to always be there too. But once the United States entered World War II, Eric had joined the Marines and shipped out. He'd left Matt to look after Chief, a strong, smart, loyal German Shepherd Collie mix. Matt grabbed the leash from the rack. Come on, boy. Running outside, he heard his mother saying something about the dishes. He felt bad for taking off, but he'd promised Eric that he'd take care of Chief also. He hated cleaning the table, especially when it was Rachel's turn. Running outside, he heard his mother saying something about the dishes. Whoops, I already read that. Matt's mother had been a school teacher in Minneapolis before they came to England. After the school closed in Canterbury, she'd started teaching Matt and Rachel herself, which was okay, except Rachel got extra classes in English, which meant Matt got extra chores. Also, Matt missed spending time alone. Well, what he really missed was spending time with Eric. Back in the States, his brother had played football and studied engineering, just like their dad. He'd worked as a fireman in the United States, and after they'd come to England, he'd volunteered as one. But despite being busy, Eric always found time to toss a ball around with Matt, to teach him Morse code and take him to a movie or for an ice cream cone. Then he'd joined the Marines. He hadn't even waited to be drafted. He'd just gone to the U.S. Embassy in London and enlisted. He left the family, left Matt, months before anyone told him he had to. And the last thing he'd said to Matt was, "Take care of Chief." "What about everyone else?" Matt had asked. "If you take care of Chief," Eric had said with a wink, "he'll take care of everyone else." Except after shoving through the side door, Chief was more interested in peeing on a bush. "Come on, boy," Matt told him, "before Mom finds us." Matt and Chief trotted down the street and across the lawn of an ancient building that loomed high overhead. Matt loved the old stone structures around Canterbury, especially the still-standing sections of the city walls. With round towers and heavy stones, they reminded him of castles, which, according to his brother, they actually were castle fortifications. The Romans had built forts here in Canterbury almost 2,000 years earlier. Matt liked to imagine Roman soldiers with shields and spears patrolling the wall and charging into battle. Matt picked up a stick and threw it across the lawn. "Fetch!" Chief charged away and returned, holding the stick between his white teeth. He gave Matt a playful, teasing look, like he wasn't going to give him the stick. "You've got to drop it if you want me to throw it again," Matt told him. Chief shook the stick once, then dropped it at Matt's feet. They played fetch until Chief lost interest and relieved himself again on a stone wall. Have some respect for history, Matt told him. Chief watched Matt with his dark, clever eyes. He was a big dog with a glossy coat, white teeth, and a pink tongue that lolled from his mouth when he panted. He sometimes scared people who didn't know him, but he also liked lying on his back and having his tummy rubbed. And most mornings he'd steal Matt's pillow, drag it onto the floor, and curl up tight, trying to fit his whole body on the pillow. He always hung over the edges, but he never stopped trying. Matt reached down and scratched behind one of his pointy ears. Another boring night. I wonder what Eric's doing right now. Chief cocked his head like he recognized the name, Eric. You miss him, boy. I miss him too. Chief whined faintly. Don't worry, Matt said. Eric's okay. He's probably off fighting the Japanese right now. Chief nuzzled his hand and looked toward the house. Fine, Matt said. I'll clean the table. But don't pretend you're so helpful. I know you just want to lick the plates, he said to Chief. He started toward the house and a shape drifted from the shadow of the wall. Chief gave a warning bark, and Matt's heart squeezed in fear. All of his parents' worries washed over him about staying in England, about raising kids in Canterbury with the Nazis rampaging across Europe. Chief lunged toward the shadowy figure, never hesitating to protect Matt. And Rachel's giggle sounded through the night as Chief licked her face. Down, Chief, she said in her accented English. You silly bear. What are you doing here? Matt demanded. You're supposed to be finishing your homework. Rachel ducked her head and her curly dark hair fell around her pale face. Would you stop following me around? Matt said. Your mother is wanting you, Rachel said. I know. That's where I'm going. Come on, Chief. Chief gave Matt a look and stayed with Rachel. He brushed his muscular side against her skinny knees. Rachel twined her fingers in his thick fur. Matt grumbled. Chief was Eric's dog. Why did he spend so much time trying to cheer Rachel up? She needed her own dog, or even a cat. Anything so she'd stop tagging along with him. Back inside the house, Matt cleared the table, then flopped onto the couch in the living room. His father wasn't home yet. That wasn't unusual. His father often worked late into the night, busy on some hush-hush engineering project with his colleagues in the British military. When Matt's family first came to England, they lived in London, which was the biggest city Matt had ever seen. They'd left after the first wave of air raids when the government started evacuating kids to the countryside, including to Canterbury. So they'd moved here into a little house between the cathedral and the city centre. Except 6 months after that, the government had evacuated those same kids out of Canterbury and shut down all the schools. They were mostly sent to the north of England. Matt's family had stayed this time. His dad couldn't move that far from work, and his mom refused to leave again. I'm not letting the Nazis chase me out of another house, she said. Matt guessed that she'd had another reason for wanting to stay. He figured she wanted to let Rachel stay in one place for a while, instead of always moving to new towns. Maybe that would help with Rachel's nightmares. Rachel had come to England a few years earlier through the Kindertransport program, which rescued Jewish kids from the Nazi-occupied countries. The program helped thousands of children flee to England from Eastern Europe before the Germans killed them. But it was only for kids. The immigration laws kept their parents and grown-up brothers and sisters from joining them. A few months ago, Matt's parents had brought Rachel to live with them. She was quiet and shy. Matt didn't mind her, really, except she was always there, like a shadow. Excuse me, like a shadow. She never left him alone. Mostly, though, he just missed his brother Eric. And he had a secret, one that he'd never told anyone except Chief. He was mad at Eric for enlisting into the army so early. And he was mad at his parents, too, for letting Eric enlist. He never said anything because he didn't want to seem selfish or unpatriotic, but every night, Matt, went to bed angry. I can't believe they let Eric enlist, he grumbled to Chief as he buttoned his pajamas that night. Chief's ears pricked up and he sniffed toward Matt's pillow. Matt flopped onto his bed. He could have waited. Chief snurfled at the sight of Matt's head on the beloved pillow. Abandoning his goal of stealing it, he turned around in circles instead and lay beside the bed. Matt yawned and said, "See you in June," because it was the last day of May, and it would be June 1st in the morning. He tossed and turned for a while before falling asleep, and he woke shortly after midnight. The air raid sirens shattered his dreams. That's the end of chapter 2.